this webinar today. My name is Q Gabriel. I was working for DataStax. Now DataStax is part of IBM. We're really proud of this new chapter in the company. So that includes obviously all of our database products, which is our DataStax Enterprise based on Cassandra. We also have OpenSearch, and for this session today, we're going to be mostly talking about Langflow and how you can be using Langflow to accelerate building AI-based applications, and some of the really cool new features that we've brought to Langflow. I'm going to get to show those off for you today. So let me share my screen. And we're going to start with this one. So if you haven't seen Langflow before, and just a quick check, I want to make sure everybody can see my screen. So let me flip over. So I have somebody helping me out. Michelle, can you tell me that you can see my screen? Yep, great, perfect, thank you. Okay, so Langflow is a visual flow builder. Now you've probably seen lots of sort of flow builder tools, and actually the Canvas portion of Langflow is built on a very popular library called React-Flow. And so if you ever see any other sort of like Canvas or lines and boxes style user interfaces, and they look kind of common, you might find out that they're all using React-Flow under the hood. Now, that said, one of the really, I think for me, the magic of Langflow is, I don't know about you guys, but before Langflow, this is what sort of my typical work and demonstration environment. Like I'm frequently talking to clients and building demos, and so we would usually show up with some kind of a notebook like this. And the equivalent to this is actually this in Langflow. And I mean, I'm going to tell you, if you have not, worked this, particularly in a collaborative context that is working with other peers, particularly maybe people who aren't very comfortable reading Python, but they would really like to collaborate, understand what's going on. I have really, really loved just the collaborative capabilities of Langflow and being able to bring more people into the discussion, for them to more readily see what is going on. And I'm going to take just a couple more minutes to just do the basics. I mean, I'm sure that many of the people on the call are already familiar with Langflow, but I don't want to assume that. So I'm going to present to you just a couple of the major portions of the UI. Over here, we have sort of pre-built components. And down here, specialized, vendor-specific bundles that you can literally just drag and drop onto the canvas. So, for example, if I wanted to go here, embeddings component, I could drop that in there, no problem. We support lots of different vector databases and different models, tons, like pretty much, well, like if we go in here to language model, you can see, well, okay, in this list, it doesn't have the full list, but we have pretty much every model provider you can think of is supported in here somewhere, and you can see the major vendors, and it's pretty easy to just sort of drag and drop that into the flow. So that's the first part of the UI, is pre-built components that you can drag and drop and just configure. And then once you start to wire them together, you have this sort of like what I like to think of as almost the whiteboard version of some software or a program that you would build, or the lines and boxes UI is the way I also refer to it. And so this is the part where it's the easiest to sort of collaborate with people. The next level of abstraction, so I like to think of this as sort of 4 layers of abstraction within Langflow. Layer 1 is the lines and boxes UI. Layer 2 is when you get into the individual components, and either the stock component, or you potentially as a component developer or somebody who wants to modify an existing component can readily say, you can think to yourself, all right, for this component, what are the parameters or capabilities that I most commonly want to expose to the users of this component? And those are the ones that you see presented as sort of the default view of that component. That's layer two of the abstraction. Layer three of the abstraction is we always have this sort of debate back and forth, about like how much of the complexity of a component do I want to expose to my users? Because there's usually, your users are usually on a spectrum of complexity that they're comfortable with or that they're most likely to edit. So what you can do is you don't have to just try to find that little happy medium and expose that. What you can do is say the most common parameters I want to expose are here on the default view. But then I can also go to this controls and publish and make available many more configurable parameters. So sort of like an advanced view, but it's still trivial for your end users to edit and make changes to. And it's also easy for them to make their own decisions about, well, you know what, I really do want the tool placeholder to be visible in the default view of this component. And there it is. It's just that easy to turn it on and off. So once you've handed it off, your users can start to customize how the experience works for them. That one's not a super complex version. Let me go right in here. That's not quite as complicated as I want either. Anyway, some of these you'll see as you drag and drop some of the stock components. You'll see that there are many controls that are considered sort of advanced and hidden behind the scenes. The last layer of complexity or of abstraction. So again, we have the whiteboard view almost. We have the default component view. We have the advanced component view. And then the last is just code. Well, see, at this point, now we're right back almost to what we were doing here in my Jupyter notebook or my notebook view, where I'm just right back down to the code, and it is just as editable. I can, of course, add comments in here, but usually, although, yes, you can definitely put comments in here, but often we find that we're going to put the comments into this part of the view, either editing the component description, the component title, or you can actually add little info like this, for example, as a little pop-up tooltip that's part of the graphical part of the user interface. Okay, so that is the super quick introduction to the canvas. But I'm also going to show you, I'm going to go back to the sort of the project organization view. I'm going to go to new flow. This is the UI you're presented with to sort of get started and say, okay, well, what can this do? And get some inspiration. And in this case, I want to show you we're going to do basic prompting. Yes. Okay. So in this flow, what we're seeing here is a couple of other features of the canvas. One is we have our little sticky notes concept. So if you have documentation that you want to share with other users who might be using this flow, or that maybe you want to remember yourself, it's sort of like, if you think again back to sort of the Jupyter notebook concept, it's kind of like what we tend to use these text block sections for, except it's free form and you can put it next to the components where it is most relevant. I've seen people really go to town with this. We have some stock colors that you can use, and I've been pretty impressed with how colorful people get with some of those. But on this flow, you're also seeing two special components. That is the chat input and the chat output. When a flow has a chat input and a chat output component on the flow, it wires the flow into the playground automatically. And so and you can obviously specify a default text here, but when you go into the playground, that effectively overrides the whatever the default was. And I can say, what can you do? And it's going to go ahead, and this is more or less at this point, because I'm using OpenAI as my default model, this is effectively just another sort of ChatGPT client just by doing that. And you can see here I had my OpenAI key. I specified that at a global level. You can set that in settings, so it just makes it very easy to change your keys and you can set all kinds of other environment variables that you can readily change for the components that use them. Okay. So we've gone through Canvas, the special input output components. But in addition to the input and output components, wiring it into the UI, those are also reused when we create an API. So Langflow is not just a design and prototyping tool. This flow is now immediately available as an API. And so I can go look at that here. I like to go to the curl. It's the easiest way to see. This is the URL that I would use to talk to this specific flow. And if I provide an input value here, you can see it's already picked up by default the same text that was in the component. But I can now write code and just change this value, call this endpoint, and now I can start to interact with this. This is just a command line, but we also provide some sample JavaScript code and some sample Python code that you can readily put into your project. But I'll also say I've had a lot of luck just taking this curl command, regardless of what programming language you're in. Use either Claude Code or whatever vibe coding tool you're using, and say, here is the curl command to call this. Can you write the correct function that would give the same behavior for your language and platform? And that is just trivially easy. Okay, so that's taken me through the API access. Obviously, I can export this as JSON to share to other people. And we're going to be getting into the MCP server in just a minute. But before we get into that, I'm going to also introduce you to a brand new feature in Langflow that just makes it easier to sort of get started with managing data and sort of getting that data into your code so you can really focus on the flow itself and what you're trying to do, and then eventually your app, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute also. If you are familiar with the Langflow UI, you may not have seen these two new areas in the bottom left corner, knowledge and my files. And these are where what we're doing is building into Langflow a sort of a default vector database, or a way to generate vector databases inside of Langflow, as well as a shared repository for you to upload files. And especially, if you're working on your local laptop or whatever, that maybe doesn't make that much sense, because it's like, well, my file system here, I can just drag and drop them in. Why would I need files? But the part where it starts to get really useful is when you have like a shared Langflow server and many people using it, and you want to have those assets, like some PDFs maybe that you're working with repeatedly. For example, like if you have a flow where you're trying to try different options and you need to constantly re-ingest a set of documents, the My Files feature can be a very convenient way and a convenient place for you to keep that. But the knowledge, I just did ingested some data here a while ago into this new knowledge base called Langflow Docs, and we're going to go actually rerun this, or run a new one, so that I can take you through how you can set up your local database. And sort of, you can, of course, like I mentioned, you can still connect to any data source you want. And like I showed you earlier, like if you go into like Cassandra, Chroma, there's different SQL options. So like just a generic SQL database, or you can use the LangChain SQL, and so on and so forth, BigQuery. But and so you have all those options. But I found for myself in particular, a lot of times when I'm especially in the early phase of prototyping an idea, spinning up another database, even DataStax' database, AstraDB, which I think is probably the easiest one to get going in Langflow. Sometimes I really don't want to do that. I really just need something that's very quick, and I can get some data and I can focus on the next part of the project. And that is part of what the knowledge feature is addressing. So let's go into this knowledge ingestion flow. And so when you create a new knowledge base, it will automatically create a very simple flow like this. And in this case, all this is doing is scraping a URL, doing some basic splitting and chunking based on some default parameters. And then you can specify where you want that knowledge to land. Now, if I say new knowledge, I'm going to get this dialog box where I choose an embedding model. Give it a name, choose an embedding model, and then provide an API key that will allow Langflow to call out to that embedding model for you. And we support, some very common embedding models here. I'm not going to do that. I don't have to do that again. Well, I guess what the heck? We'll do 2, just so you can sort of see how this all works. I've already got my OpenAI key here, so I don't have to retype that and worry about deleting that key. And so this little URL screen scraper or browser scraper, right now I've set it to a depth of 2. Let's get really aggressive. Let's go to a depth of 3. I didn't do that before. And if I don't want to actually ingest all the way, one of the cool features of Langflow is that I can sort of run a flow up to a point. So like if I wanted to run this flow, like maybe I just want to do the content extraction here, I'll let it run, and then I can click this little magnifying glass here and see what it looks like. Okay, well, this is the data that it collected. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I feel like I can go ahead and run it to the next step, which is split text. So it's going to rerun it. And then I can go look at that, and I can see how it decided to chunk that data out. Looks very similar, but I went to 1,000 chunks, which it started at 72 pages, I think. And now I'm going to actually run the whole flow, which will ingest, it'll scrape, chunk, and index or vectorize and index all that data. And that actually shouldn't take too terribly long. When I did this earlier at a depth of 2, it completed so fast that I thought it hadn't worked, but it actually had. Okay, great. So what, 15 seconds to extract, chunk, and vectorize 1,000 chunks? I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So we're going to go over and check out our knowledge, and you can see knowledge 2, which is what I named it here. We can see there's 82,000 words. It's a little over almost 70 megabytes of data, 4,000 chunks. So it's almost like I have my little local database manager here, which is very convenient. So now the next stage is, okay, great. I want to be able to work with this data and do some basic RAG with that. And you've seen many of these sort of RAG solutions, so I'm not going to spend too much time getting into the specifics of the RAG. So what I did here is there is a stock vector store RAG component here. That one by default will use an Astra database. So all I did is I took that one, and the Astra pieces were here. I removed those, and I just put in this new knowledge retrieval component. And then I'm going to change it to, I'm going to refresh my list, and then I'm going to change it to that new knowledge 2. And now the rest of the flow is just a standard sort of RAG workflow. We have our input with a default question here. We have a little parser here. Oh, that is one other area that I did have to change. In the default flow, it says something like text. This template is intended to sort of extract, the correct column from the input data. In this case, again, I can just go, run it right up to this point. So that my question, my default question is, can I get a flow into production? That did the knowledge retrieval. I can go inspect the results. I can see the content that was that it found, the title for it, create a vector RAG chatbot, description, content type, content. I don't know that this is exactly the content that I want, honestly. Earlier, I had used a different field, but that's okay. This kind of illustrates the point. So you can see in here the columns, like in this, the column says content. And let me go, no. Yeah, that is not all of the content that I really want. So but I'm pretty sure that is the correct column because it was working for me before. So what we're going to do is fall back to the one I know worked correctly and run that, and then we're going to inspect the content now and see, because this was, I extracted from the same content. So nope, it is not getting me the right content. But I guess this is the point is this: I can see the names of the columns, and I need to make sure that this parser has a way to extract the correct column to go into, then be inserted into the prompt here. So that's what the parser is doing there. So I think I'm going to try asking a question that I asked earlier, which was, yeah, how do I install Langflow? That seemed to get much better content back for me. So again, this flow has the input and output flow. We got the correct response here. I can also go back now and check out this original content. That is the correct content. So I'm not really sure why the other one, my other question wasn't good. But anyway, so now I've wired in this just a traditional RAG flow. Great. Again, I don't think that a lot of this, I think there are plenty of tools where we can do that. It's not, I think that Langflow does make this very good in terms of being able to explain it to people and people to get in, and even less technical, low code, no code users to become productive. But what happens when you want to level it up and you want to say, look, I want to connect my application to it and I want to start to iterate on this? Well, with the MCP server functionality, we make it pretty easy to on a project by project basis. So when you're organizing projects now in Langflow, what you'll see is there will be an MCP server per project. And then within that, because you can see over here, here's my flows, and here's my MCP server, and you can see here are the flows that it is currently publishing as MCP services or tools within that MCP server. I can actually come in and turn those, one or more of those off. So this is actually, these are actually not the tools that I want to expose. I really want to expose this blog writer template. So I'm going to go back to this starter project, go to MCP server, and you can see that I have 3 flows as tools here. I really don't want the quick flow. That's not necessary. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn off basic prompting. Those don't need to be available as service, so those are off. And now you can also see I've already done this, but we make it really trivially easy. If you're running Claude desktop locally, that's a very useful tool for integrating with MCP services. It's a great MCP client. And all you have to do is come in here, literally click the plus, and you're off to the races. Now, just as a caveat, I'm running Langflow just on my desktop, not in a container. If you're running it in a container, it will not be able to see your Claude configuration. So you'll have to do a little bit more work. Or if you're connecting from an application, you're going to have to do a little bit more work, but we also make that very easy for you. We provide to you the JSON, and this is the general structure that most MCP clients are looking for. They're looking generally for at least these arguments to correctly configure themselves. So I've found that with a little bit of vibe coding, I can usually make this work. I'm going to give you an example of that in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick swing at Claude, and we're going to, let's go back to edit tools. You can see I can edit this. I'm going to change this to blog writer. And I'm going to give it a little bit better name, Langflow blog writer, so that, and then I'm also going to, now these are the instructions which are handed to the MCP client when it tries to connect and discover what each of its potential MCP tools can do. So giving it a good description is important, a good name that is descriptive and a description that is descriptive, so that the agent can make a decision about whether or not this is the right tool to call for a given requirement that it may encounter. And so I'm going to say auto-generate a customized blog post from instructions and reference article from documentation about Langflow. Okay, so that is, where is my save button? Is it just saving automatically? No, it did. Okay. Great. So now I know that I've given my MCP server better information, or the MCP clients, when they connect, they're going to get better information. I'm just double checking that it didn't change anything, that it all held. Great. Okay, it did. So now the next part is how do I connect to this? We're going to start with Claude Code. And if you, because like I said, it's already connected, if you have Claude Desktop, you can come in here and see that it will have the new MCP servers or services in the app. Okay, mine is not showing. Give me 1 second. No, it's not that one. Okay, so what we need to do is, because I went back and forth and uninstalled and reinstalled a couple of these. So what we're going to do is basic prompting. We're going to go to the blog writer template that I want to use, and we're going to move it to my little solutions thing where I have not turned on MCP server. Again, this doesn't usually happen. It's just because I was trying to get ready for this and I broke things. So I'm just fixing it real quick. Great, that let me, so now I'm just basically moving it over to a new MCP server. I'm gonna click that, so you got to see me do that. Let me restart the Claude client, just like it asked me to. And now I should be able to see that MCP show up here, and it didn't, because I'm doing a demo right now. That's why, because normally this would not be a problem. All right, so there's that. Fantastic. Anyway, before I broke things, if I went into this list, you would see the MCP servers. So trying to decide how much effort I want to put into making that work correctly, because usually it's not a problem at all. Let me just give it a second here. I was actually really impressed when it worked correctly the first time, but no such luck this time. Maybe I can do this. Langflow and MCP server URL. Let's do this. Oh, well, it's running on SSE, so okay, not going to happen today. Sorry. Again, generally this works great, but sorry, I'm clearly having a hard time. Oh, I see. This was what my original one, LF starter project. Server disconnected. maybe I just need to, no, 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 no. Okay, I'm not gonna waylay us too long on this, especially like I said, it generally works just fine. So, okay, last part that we're gonna get into is how do I now go from I have clearly I have a good working project. I've got my a flow, like in this case, I'm just using it this basic blog writer template. How do I now turn this into an application other than just using it as in the playground? I want to take it and connect to it. So generally, what I'm encouraging people to do, and I've found some pretty cool success with this, is if you have whatever your vibe coding tool is, um, really you just have to open that up. And let me go to where I started this. I'll show you the conversation that I had. Yeah. So more or less all I did was this text here. So if you're not familiar, this particular tool that I'm using is called Warp. Warp is just another sort of terminal-based coding, vibe coding tool. Under the hood, it's using whatever models you choose. I found if you are into terminal-based vibe coding, this is currently in number one on the leaderboard. Obviously, that changes all the time. I found it to be very good. So all I did was I said, create a new Node.js app, which can connect to an MCP server at this location. This is the information that I got from here. So this, I provided that information to it, and then it proceeded to, now I'm going to take you through some of the ups and downs of coding this app. For the most part, I did nothing. Yes, I chose Node.js just because I knew that the vibe coding tools tend to do really well for that. And by the time it got down here, the app it had produced was this. And well, because I moved the server. Fantastic, bad move on my part, but it was able to pop up this. So now basically I've gone from a flow. I added data. I had a flow that I can modify. I can add additional instructions. And what we'll find is that in a lot of AI application coding, like I've seen some very sophisticated applications, and really at the end of the day, it gets into how you put the prompts into your flow. For example, in this case, this component here, this is where you're going to be spending most of your time trying to teach this particular flow to do exactly what you want. Like in this case, this is a very, very short prompt. Most prompts are significantly longer than this. They're going to be like a page of text or two, giving the agent um, much better instructions about what you do want it to do, what you don't want it to do, how you want it to respond, the voice you want it to respond in, and so on and so forth. And so the debugging process is you're going to be spending mostly, or the debugging and development is mostly going to be right here. But you still want to be able to then take that and put a user-facing interface on the front of that to do, let the user use it not in this way. I mean, presumably you want to allow the user to do something more sophisticated with it. And that's where using the MCP interface, using a vibe coding tool, giving it that context I just talked about, and then you can iterate on the user interface also. And so from this point, my workflow was I wanted the tool to talk to the MCP server a little bit more because I wanted it to understand more about the data, and then I could have it adjust the user interface accordingly. And so you can see, like, I was able to give it some instructions like run a few queries against the MCP server to understand its response format and modify the UI to make it easier to fill in just the most common input to interact with the MCP server. So it went ahead, did that. Now, down here, as with all vibe coding, It's not just completely YOLO where you can just hit run and it's just going to work perfectly every time. I had well, this was my own screw up because I started the server in a different tab, and so then it tried to start it over here too, and conflicted, so I had to go over there. But I think this is one of the things I personally love about vibe coding in general is I can do things like this where you can see it went and it tried to figure out it's the best way um, to communicate with that interface so that it could learn about what the correct format is. And once it did figure that out, it was able to then understand, okay, it's a SSE connection, it's running here, and it could start to adjust the code to comply with that endpoint. So rather than me historically doing what I would have to do if more or less doing this myself and saying, okay, what are the correct properties on the response and mapping those into my code. Now I can more focus on what I'm actually trying to do and the business logic I'm trying to create. And it's really more of a conversation. The last thing I'll leave you with, at least in terms of, I'm going to just give a little plug to Warp here. One of the reasons it's so good is it's very good at creating an index of the code that it's working in. So even in like this is a greenfield app, but I found even in brownfield apps, and actually especially in a brownfield app, that having an index of the code base that it can use to really focus itself matters a lot. There's several vibe coding tools that are kind of heading in that direction. I think Warp is just one of the earlier ones. But it definitely, like for example, don't I don't code on Langflow itself, like the Langflow software. But with this tool, I was able to say make some modifications to Langflow for it to do some things that I want. But if you just really are looking for a convenient way to maybe use something a little vibe codey, but you really want to just build a custom component, you can, of course, click custom component, and this will start you off with the sort of the bare bones of the component. That's fantastic. Great. If you know Python, you can get in here and start editing it. But it's kind of like kind of dog fooding in a way. If you come in here, you'll see we have a custom component generator, which is another flow that you can use to help you build your own custom components within Langflow, and then use that code to put into another component. We have some other directions here on how you can do that. I'm not going to get into that just yet. Okay, so again, we touched on knowledge. We touched on all the basics of Langflow. We touched on MCP, how you can use vibe coding tools to connect to your MCP server and generate a UI, how you can introspect the response format and generate that. Unfortunately, the Claude desktop thing didn't work, but that's also a very convenient way. Like I said, it did work the first time I did it, but not the second time. So I guess first time's the charm. Anyway, so that's it for today's session. I think that everything you're going to do to really improve building these kinds of flows is going to be a variation on that exact theme I just took you through. And then a lot of the work you're going to do, as I said earlier, will be really just working on building up and fine-tuning the prompts that are in the flows themselves. So I'm going to pause. I'll stop sharing, and I will be happy to take questions. Okay, so we've got, let's see. Wow, there's a bunch of questions in here. So I'm going to scroll back. And Jose, how should you start using? I would my favorite is just one, use for your package manager. I strongly encourage you to use UV. It's by far, in my opinion, the best Python package manager. Not to agitate anybody who thinks they have a different opinion, but you would do like install UV and then do UV pip install Langflow, and then it's UV run or just, well, at that point, and then you sorry, I said that backwards. you create a virtual environment using UV, change into the virtual environment, UV pip install Langflow, and then Langflow run. And that's the way you should do it. Especially if you want to work with some of the MCP things locally that I'm talking about, that's definitely the lowest friction way to do it. You can also Docker run Langflow. That also works and gets you up and going pretty quickly. Ingo, is it possible to export Python code of a Langflow agent for use in my local Django LangGraph environment? No, not yet. That's probably one of our most common requests since the very beginning. The challenge is that the flow is, we generate a directed acyclic graph that we have to execute. So we have to have a lot of code sort of to wrap around it. Now, you can deploy your flow easily as a container, and we have some tooling to help you do that. There's actually a little tool that we don't talk about a whole lot yet, but it is available on PyPy. It's called LFX. It's a little command line utility to launch a Langflow flow. You might want to look into that. But generally what we say is just, you're going to run Langflow. Langflow does have a headless mode. You just, it's one of the command line arguments. And so then it's, at that point, it's just an API server. And then what you would do from your Django code is you would just treat it like another API service, just like the same way you kind of call out to models and all the other services we have to call out to. And that sort of also allows you to scale it independently. If you bundle it directly into your Django code, now you're going to have to worry about scaling your application code as well. Well, basically Langflow will scale or up or down proportionally to your code, which may not actually be what you want. You may want to scale Langflow up or down more or less than your Django code. So having them separate, actually, there's some pretty good reasons for doing that. Like it is obviously a little more complicated, but to have that second service. Let's see here. Is it possible to convert and save a text output into docx format? No, not really. Not that I've seen. Now, what you could do, again, AI to the rescue, export back in the flow. There's that export button I talked about. That will export a JSON file, which you can then copy paste into ChatGPT or whatever you use and say, make a doc out of this, and it will. So that's the way I would approach it. Let's see here. Does Langflow have starter templates similar to what it ends? Yes, I showed you some of those. That's just, if you hit new flow, that's the default wizard. I definitely like the canvas and drag and drop feature. Apart from that, how is this different, better than other apps like Replit? That's a fantastic question. I think that in my personal experience, there's been a couple of times with Langflow, I had that sounds like, it's drag and drop interface, blah, blah, blah. The reality is, I've watched users side by side using very similar, sort of lines and boxes, drag and drop UIs. I think that Langflow has just done a spectacular job of hitting just the sweet spot of that sort of layered abstraction I talked about at the beginning of the hour. It has really helped to connect with a lot of people, especially people who are just getting up to speed and they want the lowest friction way to get involved. They want to, or start using it. So, yeah, there's definitely other tools that are good, as good, doing very similar things. I think that we've just done a really good job and hit a really cool sweet spot in terms of connecting with the most users in a way that they understand. So that's just my personal experience and my personal opinion. We're also continuously working to make Langflow easier. I mean, I strongly believe that the easy tools typically win in the market. So we're very laser focused on continuing to make it easier and easier to use. And that's, for example, the knowledge feature. Like, we've been able to connect to databases forever now. I mean, since day one with Langflow. Why would we need a local knowledge store to make it easier to use? That's why. So you're going to see continually us adding features like that. once an app is developed, why is that's cut off on my end for some reason. Oh, I see. There's a Q&A section. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping back and forth between the Q&A. Licensing for a freelance developer versus enterprise. We just have support. If your customer wants production support, they can go to you or they can go to us. Up to you. Maybe you don't want to be awake 24/7, 365. Tell them to license that to us, or you can do it. Is there a way to schedule workflows in Langflow? Not currently. Generally speaking, the scheduling would be delegated to the code that's making calls to Langflow. That said, it is not maybe one of the other most commonly requested features is a way to either put something on a timer or polling or event-based. Like we do have a webhook, so that can make it something that's more event-based. But right now, like I said, generally you're going to be doing that outside of Langflow, but you're going to see that show up in Langflow. It's just not there now. That's another part of easy. Vishnu, I was thinking RAG application and MCP is two different approaches. Could you shed some light? I mean, RAG in its purest sense has nothing to do with the interface to make that happen. So RAG can just be, I mean, essentially RAG is get data from somewhere, put it into a prompt template, send that to an LLM, and then the LLM uses that as source information and responds. That's it. That's RAG. But when you want to expose that as a service to some other code, now you need an interface, a programmatic interface. We started with interfaces, HTTP interfaces that were basically kind of like REST. But those interfaces are not designed to be quote unquote intelligent. And the thing is what does it mean to be intelligent, and how do you enable intelligence for your callers? That is the APIs that are calling the service. To do that, you really need to have a setup where the protocol is capable of making more than one round trip, where the protocol is prepared to expose its capabilities in the form of the functions that can be called, the arguments it can accept, the outputs that it's going to produce, and the types of all of those. So we could implement all of that on like a RESTful API, but we thought let's go a different direction and just standardize on a protocol that's still HTTP-ish. And in the first version of MCP wasn't even HTTP at all. It was just like a direct IO on like a local pipe. But now we have SSE and some other techniques to call it. So MCP is really about just the interface to RAG. And technically, MCP could be an interface to anything. It doesn't even have to be an interface to RAG. It can be an interface directly to your database. It could be an interface to Salesforce. It could be an interface to your your CI/CD backend, or it could be an interface to YouTube. So MCP is really just about the interface. Will this presentation be recorded? Yes. It'll be posted probably on YouTube, I think. Hello, I used the RGA example to test Langflow when I configured AstraDB, the connector, and the OpenAI API disconnect to no longer connect. Why is this happening? Yeah, I have to see that. I would say throw that away and recreate the workflow. Make sure you have the right key in, or keys, because you're going to need the Astra key, Astra token, Astra key, Astra endpoint, and then of course OpenAI API and API keys. So, but that was the tech support challenge. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. Is it possible to run a local LLM in Langflow? That is an excellent question. The answer is yes, it is possible. However, when you run an LLM, you have to run some kind of handler to expose the LLM as an API. In notebooks and in Langflow, you can use some Python libraries that are designed to sort of load those into memory, whether it's a GPU memory or the CPU memory, and then to handle the calls to the model and to extract the outputs from the model. However, it's pretty common now to say, all right, that the wrapper around the model is usually something like VLLM or Olama, or if you want to run locally, you can use, my favorite is LM Studio. If you haven't seen that, I love that. It makes it very easy to say, okay, this is the model I want to run. I want to publish that and make it available with an OpenAI compatible API. Yet another standardized interface that we have is the OpenAI API. And most model inferencing servers, such as VLLM, Olama, and LM Studio, and there's a long list of other ones, they will they have an OpenAI compatible API that they expose that model with. So I think that if you have GPUs available on your workstation, you can definitely do that. If you don't have GPUs available on your workstation, you could still do it. It's just going to be like painfully slow. That said, I think that the better model is to have a tool that is designed to host models for inferencing and then allow Langflow to connect with that. And we actually have, if you look in the, let me share my screen again. Share my window. Over here, like we have Olama, that it's under there, so you can drag this in here and configure this and connect to a locally running Olama. A lot of people love that. We've got, like I said, LM Studio. You can drag that and connect to a locally running LM Studio, or potentially an LM Studio that's running on a different workstation or a server. It's up to you. But the point is that's probably the easiest way to run larger models and run them inside Langflow. Let me go back over here. Nick Drew, one advantage of Langflow over N8N is it appears to be more Python friendly. You can expose a source for each component in your flow and make changes easily because it is written Python. I found N8N not so easy to modify source of components. Not hard, but not as easy. I agree with all of that. And I've talked to plenty of people who disagree with me on that. Obviously, I'm biased, but we're laser focused on making Langflow easy, and I think you're going to continue to see us make it easier. And I think many of the other tools in the market, it's really easy. It's sort of a trap as a product. You get pulled into like people, more sophisticated users, your longtime users, as they become more advanced at using the tool, they ask for more and more advanced features. And that is the people that, it becomes a large population of the people using your product. And so it's easy to hear those voices most loudly. However, and so a lot of people, product companies, will get pulled into the trap of answering more and more complicated features, but in a way that has a counterproductive effect, because your product now is catering technically to fewer and fewer people, even though that is your most sophisticated crowd. We want to make sure that we keep laser focused on the getting started, making sure that we cover like 80% of the use cases in the most easy fashion. And I think that in my personal experience, the products that I have personally built and the ones I've competed against, I've seen that is what tends to win in the market and to get the widest adoption. Are these templates available on your website? The templates are actually built into Langflow. I tried to use just the templates that were built in, and I made just trivial changes to them. So they're all in there. Why does running Langflow on desktop have fewer components? It shouldn't. Desktop should have the most components. Oh, are you talking? So we have a Langflow desktop distribution that's like a like an installer. The one I was showing you here, I installed from source, which is not the way I recommend doing it. You should do like what I talked about earlier: UV, UVVenv, UV pip install Langflow, run Langflow run. That's what you should. That's like probably the best way to do it. There are a couple of things we can't do inside the desktop version because it's running in sort of like a sandboxed environment, and so you may be seeing a few less components there because of that. But by and large, if you just do the pip install, you're going to get everything. And I will say that the installation from source, from just doing a build from the source in the GitHub, there's a little file in there called development. It's actually really easy to build Langflow from source. It's more or less you check it out, check out the Git repo. You do you have to have a couple of dependencies installed, which are documented in that development file. You do a make init, and then you have to do make build underscore front end, and then you do UV run Langflow run, and you're done. And it's running. That's been my personal experience. So if you want to actually contribute to Langflow and get in there and actually make changes to it, that's the path that you would follow. And I'd say that if you're a Python expert and you want to get involved in the Langflow community, which I would love, and if you haven't already gone in and starred the GitHub repo, please do that. But if you want to contribute to the community, we'd love for you to get involved in that. Probably one of my last questions is split text node necessarily required actually when working with documents? Why can't we simply pass them as a prompt to node directly? You can. Generally speaking, I mean, there's some debate back and forth in the community for vector search. What's the right way to split up documents that are large and what produces the best output? I think that the consensus and research still shows that even though we have LLMs with the very large context windows that can handle whole documents, they still perform better when you can focus them on the specific content that is relevant. If it's a short document, then who cares? Throw the whole thing in there. It's going to do pretty well. But the longer the content gets and the more content, like the larger the total corpus of content gets, that just becomes untenable. You can't do that because the context windows aren't big enough. Last question. Are there any examples of how to deploy the agents to servers via Docker file? Yes, that is in the documentation. Without the UX designer, just the agent configs in runtime. Yes, that is documented on the website under deployment, I think it is. But I would also point you to maybe take a look at that LFX tool. Again, I haven't actually used that. The Langflow founders, Gabriel, one of the primary engineers, and he wrote that and released it quietly. And so that's okay. So we're at the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to come in and participate in the session. I hope this was very useful to you. I strongly encourage you to get involved in Langflow, use it. And it's not just for helping you build. I want to remind you, like I said at the beginning of the call, the real magic of Langflow is when you use it to collaborate with others and get away from notebooks and get into doing a development that you can pull people in, get more voices involved, people that have great ideas but maybe don't know how to code, and you can help them really make a difference in your companies and innovate. All right, so we're going to end with that. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you in the next session.